So my name is Dana Waring. I am the co-founder and education director for the Personal Genetics Education Project. We're based in Harvard Medical School in the Department of Genetics. They are our biggest supporter and champion and funder, and so we're very grateful to them for that. Our primary focus is talking about social and ethical issues that are emerging in biology. That is not typically a thing that you will find an academic research department supporting. And so it's very sort of innovative and progressive on their part to sort of welcome these sort of ethics people and history of science people, and so we're happy to be here. And I work in Boston, but I'm actually based in Brunswick. And so I thought part of what I wanted to do in these smaller sessions is talk a little bit first about sort of like what is happening in the field of genetics, why it matters, why it actually, like this phrase personal genetics, right? Genetics is getting more personal. What does that really mean for people, right? Like, why is that exciting? I should tell you that I am not a biologist. So I am not going to, we can talk Punnett squares and genotype and phenotype if anyone would like to. Yes. But I actually come to this from a sociology and history of science background. And my main focus is to make this accessible to people who do not have biology PhDs, who did not major in biology in college, who maybe took 10th grade biology, right? We sort of understand that for most people in America, 10th grade biology is sort of where it starts and ends for sort of formal, and when I was in high school, the things we're talking about now are so radically different. And we have sort of developed a number of tools that I'm looking to share with you and hear some feedback on. Because I think some of them could be a really great fit for the general public. Including, I'm going to ask you guys, if you guys have cell phones, maybe we can do this quiz together. We have sort of written this series of quizzes, and we took our show on the road this summer. We were at the Smithsonian at the Unlocking Life's Codes exhibit. Saw hundreds of people. I was like, my dream is to have a booth like Lucy from the Peanuts. The bioethicist is in, 5 cents, and people, we want to travel around in these booths. This is one of my ideas. So I thought we should get started with, basically, right, part of how we do what we do is we have all these partners all over the country. I should put Cornerstones up here. That sort of help us expand our reach. We're actually a small outfit. And we do things like, we've developed an online curriculum. It's all entirely free. It's online. It has background notes. So it has slides, but then it has notes for each slide. I know in my experience when I try and use other people's slides, it often does not work. And so, articles, it's a very sort of complete package. And we are looking at things like Intro to Personal Genetics. What is personalized medicine? DNA in the criminal justice system. Genetics in sports. So, they're actually topics that are meant for schools, but we actually find that adults are just as interested. So that's one of the main things we do, curriculum development, and again, we give everything away for free. All of these slides I'm going to pass on to Cindy. Most of them all have links in them too to give you some background. We also, in our efforts to expand our reach, have been visiting our elected officials in Washington, D.C., conducting a series of briefings. We've got 3 more on the books coming up, where the most recent one we were talking about emerging issues in genetic discrimination. There's a newly passed federal law that protects people's genetic information, but it protects them in 2 areas: health insurance, and employment. So you can't be hired or fired based on your genetic information. Health insurance, though, is only one type of insurance, right? doesn't cover long-term, doesn't cover disability. And so we're sort of talking about where that might be headed. The next briefing, I think we're going to be talking about the use of genetics in the criminal justice system and sort of our growing databases. You know, it's getting more and more easy to find yourself in one of the federal or state DNA data banks, and sort of talking about what that's going to mean going forward. We also work with Hollywood, where they are like looking to, you know, there's the organizations that connect screenwriters with scientists to help. So some of you might remember on Grey's Anatomy, which interestingly 20 million people watch in an hour, all these shows. When Dr. Bailey got her genome sequencer and wanted to find out about her risk of Alzheimer's. So those, you know, we helped. We helped them. You know what I mean? They sort of run with it once we talk to them. But you know, we have sort of learned over the years. We have been educated that these shows have this impact. You know, there's all this data about when you talk about teen pregnancy on one of these like teen shows. I don't even know. You see all these rise in Google searches and phone calls to hotlines. You know, like there's action that people actually take as a result of these things on TV. So I told you we're going to talk a little bit about emerging issues. Why do we care? We're not going to be jargon. And I'm going to talk about I have a few books and I have a few ideas that I would love to hear from you guys about. Anyone here, I'm just curious, anyone here have had your DNA analyzed in some way from some of these companies? You know, now there's this industry where you spit in a tube, send it off, and can have your DNA analyzed, sometimes for as low as $100.
I had my brother did that out in Colorado.
Uh-huh.
Yes.
Did he talk to you about it beforehand?
Yes, he wanted I come from a large family. He wanted all the brothers to go in and get testing because they found some troubling genes that lead to various issues.
You know, it's often, there's a lot there in terms of these family dynamics. You know, I had mine done through one of these companies, and, you know, I talked to my sister, I said, so what, let's say we find something. Do you want me to tell you? Right? And I did this after I was done having my kids. She was not done having her kids. You know, my dad and I did some ancestry testing. It can crack open doors in a way that can be very rewarding and illuminating, and then it can crack open doors that you did not even know were there. Did you have a comment? 23andMe. Before, because they've recently run into some regulatory difficulty where they are no longer returning health results, but only ancestry results. Did you do it before or after? After. So you got the ancestry? Yeah. Any surprises?
Yes. Yes, there were. Just under 1% West African. It was very surprising.
Yep.
And, Native American and unexpected. European, that wasn't a surprise.
Yep.
Yeah, there were definitely surprises.
Yeah, we had the same experience. My dad, who is like a Italian, olive-skinned man named Salvatore, came back like 20% North African.
20%?
Yeah. I was like, what? Well, for one, it tells you, right, that this correlation between race and skin tone may not be what people think. And that it was really fascinating for us. Like, we know our family history, but only back to a point. You know, the narrative is we came from southern Italy. Southern Italy, very close to North Africa, should not be surprising when you think about geography, but we were nonetheless a bit surprised. I mean, it's great, but it was the sort of thing that we couldn't have found out any other way. There was no more story. And we were like peasants. There's no beautiful records about us at some 300-year-old library. So yeah, you know, we did. It was so I'll tell you a little bit more about some of what these companies are offering. You know, like I said, it can be a mixed bag. certainly I always remind anyone who's born after, like the 1960s in America, has had their DNA assessed in their newborn screen, right? That when you were a baby, they took blood out of your heel. If you have children, right, your kid's DNA has been collected and assessed. There are a number of research projects underway, actually, that are looking at parental interest in having a full genetic workup, like a full genome sequence, looking at every gene in their newborns. So one of the things, so what are people like excited about DNA, right? And what it can do. So health is one. Any others? What are people, ancestry? Aptitudes. This idea of, there are companies that are looking at things like athletic ability. Are you likely to be a power sports kind of endurance person? Are you a hockey player or are you a soccer player, right? Hockey played anaerobically, 60-second to 90-second shifts. Soccer, you're running for a really long time, right? It's like a sprinter versus a marathoner. So there are tests that claim to be able to assess that. There's lots of interest in looking at normal versus abnormal behavior, intelligence, all those kinds of things. So the medical aspect, people are super excited about this. This little boy, his name is Nick Volker. He was born with like a number of different medical issues that were very hard to tease apart. And after, what is called a diagnostic odyssey, where you cannot find the answer despite all the efforts, they decided to go ahead and sequence his genome, which is essentially like when you think about the Human Genome Project. First time we mapped all the genes, figured out where they sat on the chromosomes. That took 12 years and cost $3 billion. I think when they did Nick's a few years ago, it was in the tens of thousands of dollars. And they found something. They found like the needle in the haystack with Nick. And it informed, you can see, he had sort of spent his life in the hospital. A lot of people get worried about this picture of him with the blue on his head. They think it's a bruise. It's actually The Last Airbender, which is a cartoon movie. I don't know, the kids today. And you see him, so they were able to sort of target his medicine and target his treatment. And he now is much healthier, going to school, still has a series of health problems. But this is sort of the idea, right? That this DNA, you get your DNA assessed, and it helps you sort of narrow your path in terms of what is like the right medical treatment for you. This was just from this year, admitted to the ER. This was the first time they did a genome sequence in an emergency room. Lucky he went to the right emergency room. And they were able to understand the sort of type of pathogen, the nature of the infection. They tried to separate his DNA from like foreign DNA, and it informed the right course of antibiotics. This kid was already immunocompromised, so they really sort of needed to get it right. Genetic engineering. So we were talking about, printing organs and sort of synthesizing DNA. So in some ways, that is upon us, right? There's this new technique. We won't get into the details. It's called CRISPR. It's essentially a genetic, think of it as like genomic surgery, like the way you can very precisely go in and like cut out a tumor, cut out a piece of an organ that is not doing what it is supposed to do. Imagine that applied to your genome. That not only can you sort of cut out a part in a very targeted way, like very specific from this nucleotide to this nucleotide, from this bit to that bit, then they also have sort of developed the process in which to replace it. They sort of trick the sort of operating system of the DNA to sort of replicate in a way that sort of sends in a replacement part. When this is happening in mice, this is big news, right? Because mice are actually quite a lot like us. And so they were able to do this in an adult mouse where they were able to fix the gene and see its liver start to function in a different way. That was just this year. Are any of you following this story? Right, so Professor Church, his lab is around the corner from ours. He's George Church, one of the founders of the Human Genome Project, him along with Jennifer Doudna, and there's a number of them. Fang Zhang, there's a number of scientists that have been sort of developing this technique. Everyone loves talking about woolly mammoths. And one of the pieces I have for you guys today, I have all this sort of like reference material about like, do you want to talk about woolly mammoths? And we're bringing them back, right? This is the idea. We're going to bring them back. For real. That is the plan. And, you know, where would they live? How would they survive? What is the reference genome we would use? What's its closest living relative? Because they would sort of need to use that as a template to sort of synthesize the DNA that's missing from the fossils. And National Geographic has this amazing suite of videos that are really, you know, very engaging, 2 or 3 minutes long, the sort of thing that someone could, if you had sort of a setup in place about like, should we bring back the woolly mammoth? You know, they're working on the passenger pigeon first. It's very controversial, you know, and you can really sort of engage people on the ethics part. I mean, you can go there with the science. You can be like, all right, genetic engineering, CRISPR, here's how, you know, but the idea of bringing back extinct species, what it might mean for the ecosystem, you know, there's a whole sort of ecology piece here. But also, you know, again, this idea of like, where would they live? The libraries. I know, like, I want one.
Let's see, woolly mammoth, Maine.
I mean, we could be on the list.
Now, are they supposed to breed with modern elephants, or are they going to make like a big herd of them or something?
At least 2.
Yeah.
Then you'd have a lot of interbreeding problems.
Yes, and so there's a lot of thinking about sort of the genetic diversity question, right? That's a robust species has a lot of genetic diversity, and so yes, there are these questions about would you be able to get them sort of, you know, it's this question of are they enough of a woolly mammoth, or, you know, but can they breed with the other types of elephants that they're looking at as close matches? Yes, there's a lot there. Cindy specifically was like, we have to talk woolly mammoths. Like, I know you want to talk about your other things, but woolly mammoths. So I brought you guys, like, in fact, a whole piece about bringing this, how you would sort of do this.
Doesn't anyone remember Jurassic Park?
Yeah.
I know.
Well, I mean, that's the thing, right? Like, that is a movie. Well, I have used that movie. You know, movies are great. Movies, you know, that idea of bringing these things back. You know, I mean, that's perfect. We show kids Spider-Man. We use all the big movies to sort of bring people in or for a discussion. You know, you show Jurassic Park, and then you have like a community cafe about the extinction. Okay. I was talking about ancestry and my dad. There's my dad. Right, so we were just slightly higher than average of our Neanderthal DNA. And you know, the ancestry part, as many of you know, this idea of sort of genealogy and genetic genealogy is a winner. Because people love to talk about themselves, and they love to learn about themselves, and it can like kick open the door to all these other areas. And yeah, my dad, we laughed so hard. And the guy who sequenced the Neanderthal genome, his name is Svante Palo, and I saw him like talk once, and he was talking about when he first made this discovery, he got all these calls and emails from women saying like, I have a sample for you. My husband, I swear, has a higher than average, like he got really a lot of email to that effect, which is actually like a hilarious story. But when you think about like enough people were sort of taken with this, like scientists don't get a lot of fan mail, sadly. But like people wrote, like people found him and said, I would like to contribute. So that, that's another sort of thing you could kind of wrap up. But as much as sort of these ancestry questions can be really illuminating and fun in some ways, they actually can also get incredibly complicated, right? So for example, one of the more common things that people find in genetic testing is what is very gently called a non-paternity event. Who you think the biological father is not the biological father. And this could be, like, hey, we're going to get 23andMe kits for Christmas. And so, one of the things we do in our work is we spend a lot of time talking about informed consent, understanding the risks. This is when in my next talk, I'm going to talk a lot about Henrietta, who really this book has really like advanced that idea of things down the road that you do not know are coming, but you should at least expect something is coming, and you don't know what it is. And so, my dad and I, we had fun with this. A couple years ago, there was a research group that was looking to collect genetic information from a Native American tribe called the Havasupai. The idea was to study health issues around diabetes. And so, there was this sort of relationship that they were trying to build around trust with the leaders of the tribe, and they worked it out. They, shared their DNA and came to learn through sort of someone walking down a hallway and seeing a poster that the samples had been used to look at other issues that they were not aware of. Alcoholism, schizophrenia, these sorts of traits. And, are they genetic? Do they run in these people? And very significantly, the ancestry piece, the sort of Havasupai origin story, is that they originated at the bottom of the Grand Canyon. And in presenting the ancestry information, there was sort of a public discussion, it was in the paper, about the Bering Strait and that ancestral path. And they sued and they won. They won I think a $700,000 judgment, as well as a return of the samples. And so this idea, and all of us who interface with the medical community, you have a mole removed. Like, where's the mole go? When you have a baby, when the baby's blood sample, these questions, I'm going to talk more about this, but this is really a thing that I would rather have people thinking and talking and learning about this in a library than in like the paper gown at the doctor's office. That's not a good time to learn anything. And I think that libraries, are such like a centerpiece of communities and a place of like trust, and you can ask a question that is probably, you might think is a dumb question. There really is something unique there as libraries as like a teaching site for some of this. One of the things people worry about is genetic discrimination, rightfully so. 2008, it took 13 years to pass this law that protects people, again, in healthcare and in employment. And there have been a handful of cases, not a lot. One of the very first cases was a railroad worker, hammered railroad ties for like a long time. And he started to have carpal tunnel, went in for his workers' comp physical. They took some enormous number of vials of blood, and he like casually mentioned it to his wife, who was a nurse, and said like, oh, I don't feel good, they took all this blood. And she was like, really? Tell me more about that. And through sort of investigating this, they realized that they were sort of surreptitiously testing, looking for genetic markers that would have put him at an elevated risk for carpal tunnel. I mean, I have had carpal tunnel in the past from my laptop, casually sitting in a nice chair, my office, and hammering railroad ties. But they were trying to say, we are not responsible. This was a pre-existing condition. There haven't been a ton of cases. There have been, people who disclose that their BRCA variant carriers, BRCA 1 and 2, are associated with a significantly elevated risk of breast and ovarian cancer, made famous as a gene can be, through Angelina Jolie a few years ago, right? She came out as a BRCA variant person, and she had had a double mastectomy, I think, preventatively. And so there have been a few cases like that, but not a lot. But the idea is this protection is meant to encourage people to be more comfortable participating in research, right? Like I said, it doesn't prevent all of them. Mike Snyder, who actually happens to research diabetes, found himself having diabetes, and they were unable to increase his life insurance. Right, life insurance is not covered by this, and so there has been some concern, where people sort of get themselves tested sort of quietly and then decide to up their long-term care insurance. It's very disruptive to the insurance industry, actually, which may, like a lot of people, maybe they don't have as much sympathy as an industry as some others, but their whole business model is based on this idea of pooled shared risk, and this kind of blows it out of the water a little bit. I wanted to ask you guys this. So did you guys see this story about the Sony email hack?
Yes.
So Sony, they make movies, apparently they have a movie division, and they were hacked and published online were all of these personal emails between employees that turned out to be wildly inappropriate, trash talking everyone from Angelina Jolie to President Obama to, racial undertones, sexist remarks, I was at a meeting a few years ago where we were talking about people who are very willing to share their genetic information. There are many people who are willing to have that published online. And they were talking about how they would much prefer to have their DNA shared online than their email. Which would be more upsetting? Years and years of your private emails hacked and posted on Gawker, this gossip website, or your DNA? You would rather have your DNA shared? Who would rather have their DNA shared online than their email? Oh, I would. I totally would. Which maybe you'll be like, what's in Dana's email? I don't even know. That's the question. I don't actually know. And so anyway, it's an interesting idea when you think about privacy, right? And this is also this subject really lends itself to a ripped from the headlines. If you ever were let's have a science cafe about genetics. You don't have, every day you could be like, oh my gosh, here's something new. Or here's a question that you can sort of frame, you can sort of bring it back to these questions about genetic privacy and online privacy, right? These are combined ideas. But yes, my Facebook poll of my friends tells me, and there's probably a selection bias there, that people would be more disturbed to have their email shared. So this is one of the things, when I do this with kids, I make them get up and stand around and move around. I think our videographer will not be pleased with me if we do that. So when we talk to kids, we will often, and again, the great thing about teaching sort of these ethical questions, there's no right answer. So you can actually sort of dive into this without feeling like, oh my God, well, if they ask me about autosomal dominant inheritance, I'm going to feel like a fool. No one's going to ask you that. And if you are, you guys librarians, you'll be like, let me find out. I'll look it up. You guys, I think, are the perfect folks because you are not if you lack a piece of information, that is not terribly distressing in my mind when I think about librarians. It's okay. So we ask them these sort of philosophical questions, right? So, you know, when 23andMe, these sort of online companies that you send your spit into, there's no person who will like talk to you, who's going to say, let's talk about what this means. Let's make sure you understand the concept of risk. Do you understand relative risk versus absolute risk? Chances are you don't. It's a super hard concept for people, including myself included. When I was pregnant, I had something come back on one of my prenatal tests, and like literally I had 1 marker out of 6 for this one thing, and people who were under 35 and had only had 1 marker out of 6 had never ever had this thing they were worried about. And you could not talk me out of it. Like I was like, this is happening. My husband is a geneticist, all my sisters-in-laws are doctors, and I was not hearing them. Like I couldn't like deal with this risk question. And so the idea is, are people ready for this information? It's getting cheap and easy and available to learn about your own DNA. You don't need a doctor. The doctor can be out of the equation. And so, this idea of, do you need counseling, or should you, can you sort of do it on your own? Can you be an independent operator? This is more of an adult question. Should people have the right to find out about their DNA? It's their own body. Do you want, right now the FDA has stopped 23andMe from returning genetic information to people. So regulatory issues. Some people are very bothered by that. Other people find it like cause for celebration that, we're going to sort of pull this back a little bit.
And does your doctor have the right to your DNA information if you don't want them to have that?
Mm-hmm.
Under the guise of advancing science, is it our obligation to provide our information so that science can move forward?
Lots of people would say yes. Right, that this is sort of, and I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of this citizen science idea and this encouraging people to participate for this greater good.
That would be okay, but they turn around and make profit off that for themselves.
Right, so there are all these
Genes and things like that.
patenting genes, right? That all these people who gave samples to try and understand, you have this disease, where's the gene? Can we find the connection? Oh, we're going to patent it. Oh, now there's a drug. Right. So there are these really tricky questions about the financial part.
These days aren't over.
No. We're going to actually talk about about what has happened since this book. A lot has happened. It's not over. It's so far from over.
The places where you do the ancestry kind of stuff, do they have the ability to take it and move it into the medical arena? Do they destroy your stuff after they send it to you?
I recommend that you all become the type of people that read the terms of agreements. Or maybe you already are on some of these kits. Some of them will let you, you have to opt in. Use my samples for research. 23andMe research, 23andWe, they call it, where they are building massive databases. And if you sort of self-identify as, let's say, having Parkinson's in your family, and they are going to say, can we look for the markers? Because we don't understand, the genetics are so complicated, we don't understand it very well. So yes, there are some endeavors, and there's a big question too about if you sign up for a research study, should they return the results to you? Right? And let's say you sign up for a study about cardiac health, and in the process they discover you have a marker for BRCA. And that they're sitting on this information and they're like, we told her we'd tell her about the cardiac. What should we tell her about this other? It's a very real unfolding story. Like all the meetings that I go to, this is what is like the topic.
What is the thing to get back like? I mean, you have to ask for information on a specific thing and you only get that, or do they give you, well, we'll tell you all the health stuff and you get
Right.
paper. And is it in English?
Yes.
Is it science speak? Or
No. This is like an old dilemma, right? Since like the movie Gattaca. You know, but this, oh boy, adolescents have a lot to say about this. This is a barn burner of a topic for them. Like they have a lot to say, particularly, you know, that age that's sort of coming into their identity for the first time and sort of breaking away from, you know, all of those adolescent things. This is a big one. So, you know, these kinds of like, you know, putting these in on like discussion, flashcard, you know, there's a lot of ways. And I've done some little bit of packaging up of things for you guys, but there's a million ideas here around how to, and again, these are pretty accessible questions. You know, we have worked hard to make sure the writing, the literacy level of these are appropriate, that they're, you know, some of them are 8th grade level. You wouldn't believe the things kids say. Or they'll say, well, when is the right time if you learn about your DNA? When's the right time to disclose that to, say, your life partner? Some of them will say, after the wedding, walking down the aisle, never, 3rd date. You know, there's really a huge amount of sort of variation in what people, when you think about like when do you disclose these kinds of things. So we have this game called Map Ed, where, do you guys have smartphones? Yes. Some of you do, some of you don't. All right, so if you do, it's map-ed.org. Let's do one. We can pin Auburn on the map here. So essentially, we work our way through these questions, and then you sort of drop a pin where you are in the world. I have trash talked my colleagues in Massachusetts about Maine, that I am on a mission to have Maine better represented on this map than Massachusetts, despite our population disadvantage. And so I would like you guys to help me with this. So essentially, right, we have these various, and they're very sort of, you know, easy to, everyone gets 100 in the end. And, you know, we have this map of the world. And let me see. In part because, again, it's like you can sort of get in there. We've got these topics that are, you know, topical, like we have one about Ebola. But the genetic discrimination one is the one I would love for you guys to help me with. I packaged up a couple of things for you guys. So I packaged up one about the woolly mammoths, and maybe we can go this way, and one about like how you would do like a 5-minute what is genetic discrimination sort of project at the library. Maybe it's 10 minutes. You watch a video, Louise Slaughter, Representative Louise Slaughter, who authored GINA, made a video for us and for her talking about her piece of legislation, encourages people to play this mapping game. And then, you know, you do the quiz. And then I have all these resources from Citable, which is a project of nature education. Again, accessible, not meant for the public, where you read a short case study and you take a poll. So there's this, and you get to see the results. You know, I was sort of going for like the interactive. And then, oh, wow, you're really into it. Okay, then you should read, you know, a book about like the history of genetics in America, which is sometimes really a distressing one, right, at the history of the American eugenics movement. 3 generations of imbeciles is enough, sort of that famous statement from the Supreme Court, you know, or even something like Henrietta, you know, when you sort of talk about, you know, to sort of connect those. And I actually, for the genetic discrimination one, I also really, really think a lot about the book Wonder. Right? There's a bit. His facial you know what I mean? It's a genetic disease, and they explain it very briefly at the beginning. It's like an incredibly rare genetic disease. But this idea of sort of how he's treated and how he's discriminated, there is a science component to Wonder. Ha ha, I found it. Far from the Tree, which was a national bestseller by Andrew Solomon, he talks a lot about this idea of far from the tree, that your identity can go vertical or horizontal. And he talks about the experience of two heterosexual parents having a gay child, that the child is different from you in some significant and important way. He talks a lot about disability and kids with autism and Downs, but he also talks about like child prodigies, children born from rape, kids who have something that separates them from their parents in a significant way, which is for like the people that are not going to read the science book, Far From the Tree is a winner of a book. So that's here too. So I'm going to stop here. But I would love to know, like when I think about these things and how to put them together, I think you got, I would love to hear from you guys at some point about like how you package this. Like what is a realistic way that someone would, sit down to a computer and would they watch a TED Talk at the library? All these people I'm talking about have TED Talks, every one of them, right? Andrew Solomon's is great. Rebecca Skaloot has an amazing one on Radiolab. There's all these pieces, and I would love to sort of talk about how to package them for your teenagers, for your adults. I'm into the teenagers. There's a lot. It's one of the things, actually, that teenagers often know a lot more about than their parents. I mean, I know they think they know everything more. But in this case, they might be right because just the science has changed so dramatically. Other questions, comments? I didn't answer your question about the interfaces, about learning about your DNA. They're beautiful. They're beautiful. They're in language you can understand. They have confidence ratings. They will carefully tell you this study is probably biased because it focuses really on white Europeans as samples. So there are a lot of sort of these online tools that do make it easy to understand. But it's, again,
Is there a place that rates these, ancestral, genetic, testing companies?
I'm
as
sure
far
there-
as most ethical, least ethical,
Right.
or, best results, worst
Right.
results?
So CC Moore and Blaine Bettinger are two people who come to mind who are bloggers who write a lot about genetic genealogy. They've been involved with the show on PBS with Henry Louis Gates, where all the Finding Your Roots. But those CC Moore and Blaine Bettinger come to mind as people who have a lot of opinions on the companies. And I think they are not connected to them in any way. So. But no, there's no Consumer Reports. That's a good idea. Yep.
I'm a children's librarian. After school, we get a lot of kids coming to the public library, and they respond well to games. They'll play games that are pretty challenging to their minds. So
Yep.
Genetics games.
Ooh, I have a card game.
Card games are good.
I just got one. Where is it? I'm going to look it up. I have it, and it says for like 10 and up. I have not tried it with my 10-year-old, but I have a feeling that it could be a go. And it's totally like it's like a $12 game, so it's affordable.
What we'll do is, sorry to rush, we have to switch over at this moment. If you